Hi, my name is Peg Wheeler, and I am a licensed veterinary technician, and I'm here today at the VIP Veterinary Exploration Summit to talk to you all about title protection in the world of veterinary technology. I think part of today's goal is also to talk to you about career journeys. So I can chat with you a bit about what that looks like before we get into this conversation about title protection and scope of duty. I have listed all of my degrees here on this first slide because my journey through veterinary technology has not been linear. And it is really the beauty of being involved in veterinary medicine. There are so many opportunities, and one thing can lead you to another. And sometimes where you think you're going to end up may be entirely different from where you actually end up. I started my journey in veterinary technology in the 1980s. At that point, there were not very many veterinary technology accredited programs. So I started in a 4-year animal science program. The few accredited vet tech programs there were in states where they largely took those students and didn't really have much room for out-of-state students. So I got a bachelor's degree in animal science from the University of New Hampshire. At that time, they actually allowed you to do a dual major. So I have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in animal science and one in environmental conservation. At that point in time, the common way for veterinary technicians to get their credential was to get their 4-year degree in animal science or pre-vet, then apply to your state to take the state test. They did not at that time have national exams, they were state exams. So I took the state exam and applied for my license and worked for many years in clinical practice that way. I worked in small animal practice. I worked in animal shelter medicine. I worked in a mixed animal practice out in the Southwest. And I loved that time in clinical practice. I was a practice manager for many years, then moved into technical support for IDEX labs here in Maine. I did that. I made that move because I needed more money at that point. My husband and I had kids. We needed strong benefits and more money. And IDEX was just an absolutely wonderful way to grow my career. I did worldwide technical support for their test kits and chemistry analyzers, and it was a really great learning experience. They wanted me to travel a little more. So at some point after a couple of years, I actually left IDEX, opened my own business, which I could not have done without my credential. My husband and I had a pet services business. We did nutritional consulting, sold farm feed supplies. I did a lot of equine nutrition assessment. And we also bred draft horses and all kinds of livestock as a part of that business. During that time, I got into education, started teaching in animal science at the University of New Hampshire with a focus in nutrition and small animal care, animal science classes. I was there for probably about 20 years. They started a veterinary technology program there. And then the community college that was closer to where I lived asked me if I would do the same for them, build them a veterinary technology program. So I moved to York County Community College in Maine full-time, built a veterinary technology program for them, and then an animal care and management program. One of my concerns, having been in the education of people who were going into the field of veterinary medicine for so many years, was that they weren't sticking. There was a lot of burnout. They were leaving the field. I really wanted the next step in my career to be part of building more sustainable and rewarding careers, particularly for veterinary technicians who work really hard to get their credential. And that's going to be a bit of a theme today in my talk with you. But at any rate, I wanted to have some impact on encouraging and supporting their ability to stay in their field without worrying about burnout or salaries that were so low that they simply were not sustainable. So I watched Rare Breed, our sponsor for today. I watched them for a year. I was so impressed with their support for the whole team, but in particular of interest for me was their support for veterinary technicians. So stepping back a bit, so I got my bachelor's from the University of New Hampshire, and that was at that point in time, the main pathway to getting a veterinary technology credential. However, when you are a full-time faculty member or program director for a veterinary technology program, that is not acceptable. You have to have graduated from an accredited veterinary technology program. So while I was building the program at York County Community College, I went back to school and got my applied animal associates in veterinary technology. And I also got my master's in higher education. So that's really the basis for the career that I've built, which is unique from a lot of others that you'll hear about today. I also have a career coaching master's certificate, which is extremely useful for me because my job with Rare Breed is student recruitment liaison, but also all the student work that I've done over the past 25 years or so. You spend an awful lot of time talking to students, not only about subject matter, but about career development in veterinary medicine. So it's been really helpful for me in having those conversations. My position with Rare Breed is student recruitment liaison. So everything I do for them involves developing opportunities for students, helping to place them in job shadows, internships, externships, practicum experiences, and then helping them develop their pathway into a career. So that's who I am. That's how I've sort of gotten to where I am at. Got a couple of slides in here about who Rare Breed is. And we are a network of partner practices. So Rare Breed partners with practices from New York State down to Florida. And as I have already mentioned, their goal is really to develop what they call a kick-ass experience for our team members. And they are very committed to that. And it's really fun to watch. And they continue to grow. We partner with a lot of general practices, but the focus for growth right now is on specialties, ER practices, and building a network of urgent cares. So you have that ability to take some pressure off general practices, which are really buried right now, by accessing the urgent practice model and or that specialty or emergency practice. And this slide describes that, all of the partner practices and how they work together. So today I want to talk to you really about title protection. And this is a super hot topic in veterinary technology, and it causes a good deal of stress. So what is it? And I think it's important to define this term because I think lots of people hear it and really don't know what we're talking about. Title protection means that you can't call yourself something. You can't use a title if you haven't done the work to earn the title. So for instance, can't call myself a doctor if I'm not. Can't decide I want to go work in human medicine and start calling myself a nurse because I don't have that degree. And veterinary medicine, we accept that widely for veterinarians. You know, if you haven't gone to veterinary school, you cannot call yourself a veterinarian. But that's not been historically true for veterinary technicians. There is now a very well-known and well-worn path to becoming a veterinary technician through accredited veterinary technology programs accredited by the American Veterinary Medical Association. There are a lot of them. I believe we're at about 260 across the country. So there's a very clear pathway to doing it. It can be a 2-year degree up to a 4-year degree. There are all different kinds of curriculum processes depending on the college where you go to do your work. For instance, an online program may actually allow you to complete your program in 18 months, and other colleges are working on that fast track pathway as well. It is a pretty condensed and challenging program though. So largely you see a minimum of 2 years, and even a lot of the associate degree programs, 2-year programs, can take 3 years because there is a lot that's packed into that for required skills that students must accomplish. So once you graduate from that accredited veterinary technology program, you then have to apply to take the National Veterinary Technicians exam. It's a very challenging, high stakes test, and not everybody passes it on their first time, and that's okay. like to acknowledge that. But at any rate, once you do that, you graduate, you take your veterinary technician national exam, then you need to apply to the state where you want to practice to get a credential in whatever form that looks like. And that is just another issue. Consistency in veterinary technology is non-existent. We're really struggling on a national level to identify who we are, what we do, what our title is, and then to protect it. So currently, I'm in Maine, I'm a licensed veterinary technician. That's an LVT. That license, that L means that my license is governed by a state professional board. And so it's scrutinized at that level. If I were in another state, let's say Massachusetts, Massachusetts does not require you to be a veterinary technician in order to do a lot of the work veterinary technicians do. Their credentialing system is a credential that is a certificate. So if you are in Massachusetts, you go to accredited veterinary technology program, you take the national exam, you apply to your state vet tech association, and they manage that credential, the certified vet tech, so CVT. Some states register their vet techs. That's generally done either through a state veterinary medical association or state vet tech association, not typically through, like Maine is, not typically through the state board of veterinary medicine. So you can either be an LVT, an RVT, or a CVT. It depends on what state you're in. All three of those have essentially the same credential. If you move from one state to another, you need to move your credential from one state to the other. In other words, if I want to go practice in Massachusetts, I'd need to reach out to their vet tech association and say, I'd like to move my credential from Maine to Massachusetts. I'm looking for reciprocity. And generally speaking, that's pretty doable. There are some exceptions to that, and we'll talk about that maybe a little later. But at any rate, so I'm a veterinary technician the day I get that credential, that RVT, CVT, or LVT. I'm not a veterinary technician if I've simply graduated from an accredited program. I'm still not a veterinary technician even after I graduate and sit for the VTNE and pass it. I'm not a veterinary technician until I get that notice from either the state board of veterinary medicine or the association within your state that's managing the credential. Then you're a veterinary technician. That's your title. We want to protect that because you work hard to get it. You go to school for it, you take a high stakes test to get it, you have to apply to your board to get it. Once you have it, what's frustrating is to have other people who have not done that work using your title. If you are a veterinary technician and have been working in a practice, I could pretty much guarantee you have worked next to somebody who has not worked for that title, who's probably been referred to as a veterinary technician. It has been common over the years for that to happen. For anybody to come in who is essentially a veterinary assistant, that would be the correct title for somebody who has not completed the vet tech education, the vet tech national exam, and applied to get their credential. The correct term is a veterinary assistant. And there are some amazing veterinary assistants out there, highly skilled. But if they haven't done those things, then they are not a veterinary technician any more than I'm a veterinarian. That's sort of the bottom line. And that's what we're trying to establish, is that you have title protection once you've worked for this credential. Why does it matter? It matters because we want knowledgeable, highly skilled people taking care of animals in practice. If we do not have title protection and anyone can come in off the street and use that title, it does not encourage people to get that education, grow their skills, and really build a career out of veterinary technology. One of the biggest reasons I see veterinary technicians leaving practice is burnout, And one of the greatest sources of burnout that I hear about is this issue of, hey, I worked hard to get my credential, but I'm working next to people who have not, and they're called the same thing, they're getting paid the same rate, and that's problematic. If we want to keep highly skilled veterinary technicians in this field, we need to start to really respect title protection. It does establish it. Why else does it matter? Obviously, it does help us make sure we're providing really high quality care to patients. There are veterinary assistants in the field who are highly skilled in terms of their hands-on work in the practice. I think veterinary technology degree does bring you some foundational information that puts things at a different level, and understanding for what you're doing, and understanding for how drugs work, how your equipment works, why you're doing the things you're doing. It matters, and it matters in terms of keeping people in the field and making sure we're providing the highest quality of medicine for our patients. So who has it now? And who has title protection now? It is very inconsistent from state to state. So some states, like Maine, have a very strict title protection law. In the state of Maine, if you are a veterinary assistant, allowing yourself, and I'm being really purposeful about my words here because it matters. So if you're a veterinary assistant, and that can be anybody, because right now there is no requirement for what it means to be a veterinary assistant. There are certification programs, and they're great, but you could conceivably graduate from high school and say, I'm interested in a career in veterinary medicine. I'm going to go work in a practice for a while and see how it goes. Once you get there and you're doing that, that's a veterinary assistant. You don't need to have a credential of any kind. The work you're doing is that of a veterinary assistant. So if you are that veterinary assistant and you're allowing yourself to be referred to as a veterinary technician, in Maine, our title protection law makes that a criminal penalty. That is a criminal violation for a person who has not gotten that credential. So gone to an accredited program, taken the national exam, applied to the state, and gotten their credential, their license. If you haven't done that, but you're allowing yourself to be referred to that way, there is a criminal penalty associated with that. And not everyone knows that. It's been, that law passed in 2016, and there really hasn't been a push to get it out there. I think it's starting to become more widely understood that that's the case. And there are other states that have title protection as tight as Maine's, but there are still some states that don't have title protection at all, where that can happen. You could have done all that work to get your credential and legally be working next to somebody who has not done that work and still can be referred to as a veterinary technician. Okay, so we'll look at some specifics. The National Association of Veterinary Technicians in America, or NAVTA, that is the primary professional association for veterinary technicians in this country, has really been trying to get a hold or wrap their arms around this issue and figure out how they can advocate to fix it, right? How we can get this consistency in all 50 states, because it's very difficult to see how we move this industry forward in terms of some of the really exciting initiatives that are out there for veterinary technology. How do we move forward if we sort of haven't gotten to this really first level of assuring all of us across the country a safe and rewarding career? So we'll look at some of the similarities, the inconsistencies, and what problems can result from this current dynamic. So before I move on, the inconsistencies are this. Some states have nothing at all. So like I said, you can legally call yourself a veterinary technician without having done that. Some states have the title protection that is not as penalizing as Maine's is. Some states have requirements for continuing education. Maine, although we have one of the tightest title protection laws, we do not have a requirement for continued education. That seems silly. The state association is working on that, but it is an inconsistency, and those sorts of inconsistencies can be found across country. Why does that matter? Some of the problems. What if you want to move from one state to another? If you've been living in a state like Maine, where your title is protected and you are really working at the upper level of utilization of the skills you've been taught because they've built out their team appropriately. You have veterinary assistants, super important work. They're assisting veterinary technicians so that veterinary technicians can perform at the top of their skill level, and they are supporting veterinarians who can then really work at the optimum level of providing those sophisticated skills to their clients. That's an efficient team. For every one veterinarian, you should have 2 to 3 veterinary technicians. And for every veterinary technician, same thing for veterinary assistants. You should have a couple of veterinary assistants for each veterinary technician. If you're working in a state where that's sort of the accepted structure, and you move to a state where there is no title protection for veterinary technicians, one, you may find that your salary won't be the same, because there's no distinguishing between who's learned to do what they're doing on the job and who's gone to school and gotten their degree, passed the exam, and gotten a credential. You may have that credential, but what does it mean if we can pay people less and there's no law that says we have to have credentialed veterinary technicians on our staff? So it matters that way. It can matter for quality of medicine that we're delivering to our patients, because there's not a consistent level of expectation for what that looks like. Who's delivering that care? Who's monitoring the patient in surgery? Is it somebody who's learned on the job, or is it a veterinary technician? Along with title protection, once a state passes a rule or a law, we could talk about that. So title protection can be a legislative change, so a law. So if you're in a state that doesn't have title protection right now, you could seek out a state legislator and say, hey, I want to work with my state veterinary medical association, my state vet tech association. We all want to work together and put in a bill to get title protection for veterinary technicians in the state. That's a legislative change. Maine's is a legislative change. Some states go through the state veterinary medical board. That's a rule change. So the state board of veterinary medicine can make a rule that impacts your state practice acts and says whatever it is that the state's going to put in for title protection. Along with that comes what we call scope of practice. Scope of practice, if you have title protection, it says if you've gone to school, taken your VT&E, applied to the state or the group managing licenses within your state, you get your credential. What can you do? What does that mean? What are the list of things that you are then able to do? If we don't have consistency in our title protection, scope of duty is all over the place. If you move from one state to another, you're going to need to not assume anything is the same until you verify. What is it? What is your title protection? Is it existent at all? Is it a law or is it a rule? And with your title protection, what is that? How strict is it? And what is scope of duty attached to it? So what things do you do that your veterinary assistant who may be working with you is or isn't able to do? Most scope of duty for veterinary technicians from state to state will look very similar to a lot of what veterinary assistants can and do perform. The difference is largely some sophisticated skills that are going to be in tight title protection states. Veterinary assistants are not allowed to do. There are some, but for the most part, a lot of them are very similar, and the difference is between direct and indirect supervision. As a credentialed veterinary technician, I can do my scope of duty with indirect supervision. which means the veterinarian only needs to be within a phone call. Does not need to be in the room or within earshot. I have to get instructions from the veterinarian and be able to get a hold of them if I need to. Not so for the veterinary assistant. The veterinary assistant needs direct supervision. So scope of duty may be different from state to state. Title protection, no assumption there. Really need to identify wherever you're going to be, what that looks like. And the difference between what the vet tech and veterinary assistant can do if there is title protection can vary as well. And this creates a lot of confusion within the industry, I think you can see. So I've pulled up for you some of the current struggles that we're experiencing because of these issues. Because we haven't locked down a consistent professional profile across the country, like a nurse has, there are conversations happening that we all in veterinary medicine should be paying attention to. One of the loudest conversations that's been happening recently is in Washington State. In Washington State, they are working on circumventing accredited vet tech programs by creating an apprenticeship program. So what this means is if this is successful in staying the way it has currently been presented, you will not need to go to an accredited veterinary technology program in order to get your credential. You could just do an apprenticeship with some structured learning. This apprenticeship does have some other academic learning associated with it, as most apprenticeships do, but it circumvents that really structured, what's the word I'm looking for, high quality of education that veterinary technicians get in an accredited program. This is circumventing that, and it's frightening. If we have a profession we're trying to protect and keep at a high level and maybe even bring it up into conversations people are talking about in our industry, there's lots of conversations about mid-level practitioner, about changing titles to veterinary nurse, all kinds of really exciting things that require a whole lot of conversations that we're not going to have today. But if we're moving in this other direction, sort of sliding back, it's concerning. It's concerning to those of us who want to see this profession go to the next level, to see educational expectations maybe dropping back. When I look at this, it makes me think, I think it was 2019, there was a similar effort in the state of Maine. There was a conservative group that came to the state legislature and was looking to do away with a lot of professional licensing. If you Google that, it's a thing. There are efforts in a lot of states to do away with all kinds of professional licensing because they believe, groups believe that it is a barrier to getting into a profession. So in the state of Maine in particular, the hearings were about doing away with professional licensing for veterinary technicians, high school athletic directors, EMTs, cosmetologists, and I think there were one or two others. I think it was about a half a dozen professions. They were looking for the state legislature to agree to abolish those professional licensing requirements. Now, if you think about that, that's a really big deal. If those of us who've been practicing in this field were at work one day with our credential meaning something, and the next day that credential requirement is the licensing, everything is just gone. What's your profession worth at this point? I was teaching at the time and running a vet tech program, and the president of the college said to me, Peg, if that goes through, your program is done. Because what they were trying to do was do away with the credential requirement and turn it into all of those careers into careers that could be accomplished through an apprenticeship that a student could enter into in the 8th grade instead of going to high school. The theory being that some students don't like to sit in classrooms, and there must be a more engaging way to get them this education by simply getting them into practices that are willing to do apprenticeships. This matters. There were a lot of us there to testify. at the hearings where this was presented in Maine. We were really fortunate. People were paying attention. Our national association, NAVTA, sent people. We had a lot of people there, as did athletic directors, EMTs. You can imagine the EMTs. I mean, do you want somebody with an 8th grade education and apprenticeship coming to your rescue? Probably not. So we were pretty successful in preventing any of that from happening. But I look over my shoulder every day because it's not going away. If you, like I said, if you Google it, you'll see these efforts are everywhere. And as I think it is super important for us to represent ourselves strongly so that people are clear that the welfare of people's animals really relies on us advocating for the importance of our own education. So the other article I have here is one that the NAVTA report shows. Title protection for veterinary technician is necessary and desired, but absent and misunderstood in most states. And this is the meat of the problem here. I'm explaining to you what the title protection means in the state of Maine. And as this article states, for the most part, it's misunderstood. And having these conversations gets really emotional. If I'm talking to someone in a practice about this issue, people ask a lot, hey, I'm a veterinary technician, I got my credential. How come the person next to me is being called a veterinary technician and they didn't? And I say, we do have title protection, and that is against the law to do that. It gets really emotional. That veterinary assistant wants to know, oh my goodness, why can't, I've been calling myself this forever. You can't tell me I can't call myself this now. And I say, well, it's not me. It is the law, and it is meant to protect everybody. There are multiple roles on the team. They're all important. Veterinary assistants are critical to the well-functioning veterinary team. But we all have to remember what our position is and what our title is, the appropriate title is that's attached to that position. Here's another one, and this is just an example. So like I said, you can Google this and find lots of examples of groups that are looking to do away with title protection in various states in the country. And remember that, as happened in Maine, that wasn't a Maine group that came to Maine to do that. It was a group from another state that has been traveling state to state working to accomplish this. This is a posting or a pasting of an article on the Regulatory Transparency Project, Unlocking Innovation and Opportunity, from the group called the Federalist Society. And they're a group that regularly does travel around the country and try and do away with a lot of professional and paraprofessional licensing. And as you can see, the title of their article, Occupational Licensing Run Wild, indicates their sense about this. And that highlighted sentence at the bottom, this paper, if you look it up, you should be able to find it. Our paper demonstrates the scope of the problem, explains many costs that excessive occupational licensure creates, and describes the emerging bipartisan consensus in favor of reform and rollback of state level licensing regimes. This is what their opinion about this. That has not been what I have actually seen translating into reality. So these efforts are happening. They result in a lot of conversations from the professions that they're going to impact. My example to you of the ones that we went to in 2019, where there were a half a dozen professions that they were trying to impact, and none of them were impacted. So I don't think that we're actually seeing that this is successful. I think that what we're hearing when you go to those hearings is people want to protect the services they're getting so that they know as a consumer, they are being protected, that they're getting good quality care for their animals, or any of those other professions. You'd argue exactly the same thing. I know this is small, so I don't know if you can, how well you can see it on your screen, but this was also taken from the Federalist Society. And this is an occupational ranking of what they consider to be the burden of licenses. And you can see veterinary technology is number 15 on their list. So it's there, it's on their list of professions that they continue to look at for removing title protection, which is licensing to protect your title, making you get your credential. This is an effort to sort of continued effort to, I don't want to say undermine it, but that's essentially what it would be doing. And you can see all the others that are on here as well. So if we put these pieces together, what does title protection provide? So it does provide you with scope of duty. So you understand in your practice acts what the list of things you can do looks like in terms of who in the practice is allowed to provide dental cleanings, surgical monitoring, anesthesia, catheters, all of those things. What do vet techs do and what do veterinary assistants do? And that kind of clarity is really helpful when you are developing a business model in your practice that is going to support optimal utilization of each team member, right? We hear a lot about vet tech utilization right now. It is one of our main goals to make careers more sustainable, is to make sure everybody in practice understands what veterinary technicians are trained to do. We can't utilize people fully if we don't understand the skills they have. And scope of duty is really helpful that way, because scope of duty outlines those things. So when we want to talk about how do we free up the veterinarian to provide those high-level services as optimally, as efficiently as possible, well, it's by making sure we're fully utilizing veterinary technicians. Once they take over things like placing catheters, anesthesia, all of the things that veterinarians don't need to be doing if you have credentialed veterinary technicians on staff. And veterinary assistants support that work of the veterinary technician. So that, if we're going to ever get to a place of having high functioning teams that can work really efficiently, everybody makes a better wage and everybody feels better when they go home at the end of the day about what they've done, because they're doing what they were trained to do. So for a veterinary technician, that title protection provides you with a career. If you don't have title protection, it's very difficult to understand how you can advocate for yourself in a meaningful way in the veterinary practice. For your clients and patients, it assures them that the people who are doing those skills, those high-level veterinary technology skills, have gotten an education, have taken the national exam, and bothered to get their credential, and hopefully in many states to do your continuing education, although Maine currently does not require it. So this is our profession. I'm speaking to veterinary technicians, and we need to decide what we want the future to look like. And what can you do to work on that? Join your professional associations, be active. It doesn't take a lot of time. If you're a student in veterinary technology in the state of Maine, please join the Maine Veterinary Technicians Association. My information is going to be on our final slide, which I'll bring up, and you're welcome to reach out to me and I can connect you to them. They do have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and we're on LinkedIn too. So here is a statement from the American Veterinary Medical Association talking about duties of veterinary technicians and assistants. I'm going to read it to you quick. Most states have laws or regulations governing what procedures veterinary technicians and assistants may or may not perform. They vary. The majority break down allowable procedures. And while states may give some indication of what procedures technicians and assistants may perform, some states don't. And so there is a link in this PowerPoint too, but the American Veterinary Medical Association is super easy to find, and it's a great place to get more information on this topic. So there's my contact information, my email address. If you scan the code that's on this last slide, it'll connect you to Rarebreed if you'd like more information or like to have somebody reach out to you. And I am happy to connect you with somebody who can provide you more information in your particular state, or give you other information or answer any questions you may have on this topic. It is a really important topic, and you need to get involved. Again, state associations, join your national associations, NAVTA, and stay on top of what initiatives they're working on. You may or may not agree with what they are, but you need to get involved in those conversations so you understand the purpose and the goals, and can make really informed decisions about how to use your time, whatever little time you have between your work life and your personal life. We want you to have a balance, but we also all need to work together to move this profession into the future. Thanks very much for your time.